Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com. This is Triangulation, episode 278, recorded Monday, December 19th, 2016. Tim Wu. Triangulation is brought to you by Optical Cables by Corning. Corning's incredibly durable Thunderbolt and USB 3.0 optical cables are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com to learn more. It's time for Triangulation, the show where we get together with some of the most interesting people in technology and spend an hour together. We call it Triangulation, not Biangulation. Well, because I don't think there is a word biangulation, but also because it's more than just me and our guest, it's you too, because if you can tune in live at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 UTC on Mondays, you can join us in the chat room at irc.twit.tv and offer your thoughts, comments, and contribute to the show. So it really is a three-legged stool here on Triangulation. I've been trying to get our guest today on literally for 6 years, since he wrote a book that was life-changing for me and for a lot of people called The Master Switch. He also wrote the paper in 2006 that coined the term net neutrality and has been a champion for net neutrality and for all of us on the internet for a long time. Professor of law at the Columbia School of Law, Scientific American named him one of the 50 leaders in science and technology. Politico's top 50. He's worked both in government and at law. Tim Wu, so glad to help you. Have you. Welcome.
Sure, it's great to be here.
Yeah. His new book is, it's funny. It's a great read, even if it didn't have, any message. And I'll tell you what the message is in a second. But it's a fascinating history of advertising, starting back with the beginnings of mass media with the broadsheets in the 1830s. Up to present time. I really enjoyed it. What prompted you to target this particular area?
It's a great question. So the book is, as you said, about advertising models, the business models behind so much of what we do today. And I guess I just first was just interested in advertising, history of advertising, but also interested kind of exploring how we live today. I think that so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis is based on something that feels free but is actually ad-supported. And I kind of wanted to understand, where did that all come from? It's a little unusual. I mean, the normal kind of thing you have in mind when it comes to business is you pay for a product and you get it. But advertising-supported stuff is different. It feels free or very cheap. But then what's happening somehow is that the audience is being resold to advertisers. And, try to get an idea of where that came from. That really interested me. I'll add one other thing. I also started noticing, just in terms of my own attention, that I felt like I was losing control of myself a little bit, and that motivated me too. I don't know if you ever had this experience where you sit down to write an email and you notice that 3 hours go by and you don't know quite what happened. Well, that also kind of influenced me, and I think, a growth in the inability of people feeling they can concentrate or get work done motivated this book as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun just as a history of advertising. Now, I should disclaimer, this is a ad-supported media you're on right here, like radio and TV. That's what I grew up in. I've been 40 years in broadcast media. And I always liked that model as opposed to a paywall model because it's at least in the way we do it and the way in its infancy it worked. It was a pretty clear demarcation between content and ad. And I think people who watched it or listened to it understood that was what was paying for the free content. It wasn't as muddied as it has become in the internet era. And to me it was democratizing. If you do something behind a paywall, there's great stuff behind a paywall, but not everybody wants or has the money to spend on content. And so I think free media, which is where this began, or almost free media, is I hope okay in your mind. Tell me first who the attention merchants are. What does that mean?
Well, it refers to everyone with just that model you talked about: ad-supported media, ad-supported businesses, ad-supported utilities. Anyone whose business models, as you said, is reselling an audience. I think that's what we're talking about in this story. I just want to make clear, I don't. The idea of the book isn't to suggest that everything that's supported by advertising is somehow inherently evil, or that we should never use ad models. I think it was just to understand the implications of their spread, and to discuss the history where something that was quite obscure came to anchor so many parts of our lives, moment to moment. But no, it's not this sort of idea that it can't be useful for anything. There's obvious challenges with having everything being paid models as well. I just wanted to sort of really understand how this became a business model that is so important to our lives.
Yeah, when we first started as podcasting, I had, as I said, been for years in free media, but I thought, well, it'd be really nice if we could have this direct connection with the audience and have them pay for the content. That would be the cleanest, simplest way to do it. And it just didn't. It's
hard to do.
It's hard to do. Only certain kinds of content can really thrive that way, and we've seen that, with newspaper paywalls and so forth. That not everybody can do a paywall. I want to read I hope this is spoiler alert. The last paragraph of the book, just not the whole thing, but I just want to read a couple of sentences because I think it kind of tells you what's going on here, and then we'll go back and talk a little bit about the history of advertising. At bottom, Tim writes, whether we acknowledge it or not, the attention merchants have come to play an important part in setting the course of our lives and consequently the future of the human race. Holy cow. That's like the most depressing sentence I've ever read. Insofar that the future will be nothing more than the running total of our individual mental states. So that's why you call attention to it, why you want us to think about it. Our attention, in a way, really is the only currency we have to spend as human beings, right?
Look, I think that what I said at the end is right. I don't think it's depressing. It's just true.
Yeah.
When you look back at your life, it really is the sum total of what you paid attention to.
Yep.
There's nothing else.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was what it was. You read this book, then you chatted to your friend, then that's it. Like your brain has a little cursor.
Right.
And whatever your cursor's on, that's it. That's your life. So, part of the reason for writing this book was give a sense, well, let's try and think about what we pay attention to. And, whether it's ad-supported, not ad-supported, just are you spending your attention, which you suggested is, really the last of all currencies. Are you spending it the way you want to spend it? I hope people, for example, listening to this podcast feel like they're learning something and have decided to listen to it because they want to, There's a big difference between that and sort of wandering through life and having whatever just grab you for 5 minutes, something else. I think there's some danger in our times of kind of having your life essentially be frittered away in essentially 30-second increments where you bounce from one thing to another. Now, some people choose to enjoy it, but I think sometimes it becomes involuntary. You almost lose control of yourself. I was saying earlier about that challenge of going on the internet, trying to write one email and having 400 other things happening, and you wake up and you're like, what did I just do? Like, where did my time go? Sometimes that happens on TV as well. And, I'm one of these people who believes in a kind of a directed life, trying to achieve what you'd like to achieve. And that I think is motivating that this book.
Do you think it changed with the advent of mass media? And you trace that back to the early 1800s with the first newspapers and broadsheets. Do you think that changed? But pre-mass media, were people more in charge of their attention, and did they use it more wisely?
I don't know if that's completely true. I mean, it's always sometimes we like to pretend that earlier generations somehow had it better than we did. My suspicion from reading a lot of history is that before the 19th century, a lot of people spent a lot of time being bored. That boredom was like
we don't have that problem.
Huge fact, and it's really interesting. I mean, one of the ideas of this book is we have, in the same way I think we've conquered hunger more or less for in a rich country. I think we've also more or less conquered boredom. I don't know about you, but I usually find that the problem is too much stuff, not like, I can't think of anything. Sometimes I get bored in the sense that, you're stuck in a meeting or something. But in terms of just having absolutely nothing to do, the way someone on a farm in the 19th century might be, I don't think that is something we have. But we're starting to face some of the opposite problems: too much stimulation, too much living for the next, kick or, the next jump. Kind of a little bit like, I don't want to over-exaggerate it, but a little addicted to enjoyable little experiences. I think
amused to death, as Neil Postman would.
Amused to death. That's the old thing. And I think there's some truth to that. A lot of people find it really physically hard just to sit there and not like start to play with their phone for a little while or look for some little tidbit or just can't stand it. And that's kind of who we've become. So I think other generations, I don't know if they were like focused like Zen monks, but I do think they did have the amazing capacity to get some things done that we would think are impossible right now, like playing an entire game of Monopoly, or doing complicated puzzles, or doing long division by hand, and or creating works of craftsmanship with a lot of patience, writing entire books as opposed to little snippets. So I do think there is a change almost in the entire human race as to what kind of creatures we're becoming. And a lot of it has to do with our information environment, the kind of cocoon we live in, and what it allows us to do as a product. And that development of what I'm calling a built intentional environment, an environment where most of what we interact with is created by us, I think is new the last 200 years, and I think is profoundly directing what we are as a human race. So, I know that sounds like really big talk, but I actually think it's true. So there you go.
Well, and I think everybody who's watching, and certainly anybody who is as engaged in technology as our audience and I am, kind of is aware of this. It almost anecdotally feels like we're changing our brains to the point where it's not enough just to sit in front of the TV now. We also have to have a tablet in front of us and be doing something else at the same time. We need even more stimulus. And I think in some respects, this becomes a vicious circle.
Yeah,
because you need more and more. We're creating a kind of a situationally ADD society. Your book is also super timely, because we're at the tail end now, and I'm sure you're watching, and we'll fill you in if there's any news from the Electoral College. I'm sure you're watching with interest. But we're at the tail end of what you might almost say is the perfection of the attention merchants. The way the media was used, the way social media was used in this election is in some ways flabbergasting. Was it a surprise to you, or did you see this coming because of the book?
Right. As I watched the Trump campaign in the latter stages of the book, I thought, this book is going to be really useful for anyone who wants to understand what Trump's doing. But I didn't expect him to win. I saw him using the techniques that have been successful in the entertainment business and also among certain totalitarian governments and in advertising for essentially capturing the mass, capturing the masses and moving them when you're something of an outsider. In fact, it's sort of a three-part thing. Maybe I'll just describe the technique, because it's very, very clear from early advertising, also from, as I said, from World War I, World War II propaganda.
And you point out in the book that propaganda comes, I'll let you go in a second, from the word propagating the faith. It's originally a technique used by religions to promote the faith, and then subsequently by governments, and then subsequently by advertising. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. I mean, a big theme of this book is essentially government and advertisers, or commerce, essentially stealing all the techniques used by religion for hundreds of years to try to move things in their direction. And propaganda and advertising, their link to organized religions techniques is often very clear, including the word propaganda, which was, as you said, a religious, in fact, I believe associated with the Jesuits of the Catholic Church to propagate the proper faith, counter Reformation for the historians in the audience.
Yeah.
So the three-stage technique, it works like this. So number one is, above all, the most important thing is win the battle for attention first. A lot of very smart people have the idea that they want to get to the merits of the argument. Yeah. They get into the weeds, as you say, very quickly. A different kind of person, someone like Trump or someone like an advertiser, understands first you have to get people's brains at all paying attention to you, and that requires, whether it's being outlandish or being extremely forceful or saying shocking things or whatever it is, or just looking strange. It doesn't matter. You just have to win that initial battle for attention.
There's no such thing as bad publicity. In fact, famously, Mr. Trump, years before his political ambitions, called a writer of a really kind of a nasty article about him. I can't remember if it was in the New York Magazine or somewhere, and thanked him for it. Because instinctively, Trump understood that the content of the article wasn't as important as the attention that it generated.
Yes. There's a fight before the fight that a lot of people don't realize, which is the battle for attention. And it doesn't matter. And the weapons of that battle are different than like what smart people think they are, because they have nothing to do with being right or wrong. They have to do with just creating enough noise and sound and triggering basically very basic parts of the brain that you pay attention.
It's the lizard mind going, there's a tiger in the brush over here and I have to pay attention to it.
Right. So that's step one. Step two is once you have won that battle for attention, you actually have access to people's minds. You then, if you're a talented advertiser or a politician, seek to give voice to deeply held unconscious fears or desires. The thing that people really most want, even if they're ashamed to admit it to themselves. And that is done usually by being very good at reading your audience. Not everyone has that skill, but the people who do know what I'm talking about. Is just kind of looking at your crowd, it usually works best one-on-one, but you can do it from a distance, and just trying to figure out what they really want. One thing I think really worked for Trump was the fact he did all these rallies. He was able to read what do they want to hear at these rallies. He did more rallies than television.
He got the feedback loop going, because television is one way. But when you're in front of an audience and you could see it happening, he even says, "I didn't like Drain the Swamp. Then I said it,
right,
and I loved it." And the reason, obviously, is because the crowd went.
You can get at least what some people want to hear. Now you can be misled depending on the crowds you're addressing, but you feel, and sometimes it's things that people really don't want to admit to themselves. Negative emotions are very, very powerful. Hatred or really crippling fears, and you give voice to them, and that's a very powerful motivating factor. And then the final third stage, common to advertising, but also to certain politics, is to offer yourself or your product as the solution. Here is the answer.
Well, he quite literally did that in his acceptance speech. I am the solution.
So it's not enough. It's a kind of call to action in advertising terms. It's not enough just to get people fired up about something, which I think is something very well-meaning some people do sometimes, but is to offer a solution that is somehow very confident and full. You see this in advertising a lot. Maybe I'll pick up an old ad from the book. In the 1920s, there was all these ads warning people about the problem of bad breath and what it was going to do to you.
Halitosis. I didn't realize until I read the book that halitosis was a term coined by the advertising agency for Listerine. It wasn't a real word.
Yeah, whether it was or wasn't, they definitely.
Well, real and Listerine really was this really shocked me. Originally used like as a floor mopping. It was an industrial solvent.
Yeah, it was used for washing floors. I think it was used as a battlefield disinfectant at one point in World War I. So, and then new management. What are we going to do with this stuff? The way it was sold to women is explained in the book. Very interesting. Is this campaign? Poor little Edna, often a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Another phrase that you hear all the time that was created by their ad agency.
Created the ad agency, and the idea you can see this three-stage process I just talked about. Speaking to that fear, which a lot of women have, even if they want, especially maybe in the less now, but certainly in the 20s, of not being married, never finding a partner, becoming an old maid, the very serious kind of fear, and speaking to it, sort of alerting it, then offering Listerine, offering the reason, the problem, bad breath. Little Edna was as charming and beautiful as anyone else, but no one would tell her she had bad breath. And then you offer your product, Listerine, as the solution. And, this is going to solve the problem. And when you put those things together, they can be extremely compelling. So to get back to our original topic, I saw Trump doing this. And I was very curious to see if it was going to work or not. I mean, I felt that a lot of people got suckered. by thinking, oh, there's no way, those are ridiculous arguments. He said the stupid thing. But they didn't realize he was winning the battle for attention. I mean, through the Republican primary, he got so much coverage that he just reached more people. And then he had, something there for them. They didn't care about, what he said about immigrants, or maybe they did, but they didn't care enough. But they did care what he said about jobs or some other message. And it spoke to them very deeply and created an audience and created a voting movement for him. So, he did a lot of foolish things and was, not an experienced politician, but he certainly won the attentional game. And that's part of what you can see from this book is just how important that attentional game is in our society, and probably will become more in the future.
Well, and as it turned out, maybe that being a media genius was a much more useful skill than being a good politician. In fact, being a good politician probably was not the right skill for winning the battle for attention.
The politician goes for something else, I think. They're seeking to be sort of reassuring or competent, or, they'll do a good job. They speak to the issues. Some of the good politicians use the same techniques, but certainly that wasn't Hillary Clinton's technique. No. She had attention because she was famous, but she had no sort of emotional draw to people's deeply felt fears or desires. She kind of just said, I'm going to do a good job. Yeah. Promised good management, basically. Which is better for the country? I don't know. I don't know what to speculate on, but it doesn't necessarily move people to want to do something. I mean, you don't have to be a psychologist to know that emotional pulls are much more powerful than the power of the rational mind.
Another thread in our modern times, the fake news thread. It's fascinating to read. I'm reading along at this. It's really early on in the book. We're talking to Tim Wu, the author of The Attention Merchants, the epic scramble to get inside our heads. With the advent of mass media in the 1830s, there was a battle in New York City for newspaper dominance. The first newspapers charged a penny. Actually, the first newspapers charged like 20 cents. They were the expensive paywall newspapers. Then along comes Benjamin Day, who says, hey, we could just charge a penny, but make it up in advertising. That was kind of a brilliant insight. And then a war began.
More than brilliant. Can I interrupt you and say that was the invention of your entire business model? Yeah, that was it. Colossal. It was a huge moment. That should be remembered like the Wright brothers in the airplane. I mean, he invented ad-supported media in this moment, and the world's never been the same since. Whether it's Facebook, Google, this show, ESPN, you name it. So that was more than a nifty little invention. I just want to say that right here.
But what you also point out is once you get in this position of doing that, giving away the newspaper, making it up in attention, there is this tendency toward this downward spiral because you have to chase the attention, and the ante is continually up. So a few years later, a competitor, that came along the Herald, and then the Sun, which was the original, in 1835, upped the ante with fake news. They ran a headline story, they said, reprinted from an Edinburgh newspaper, of astronomical discoveries by the famous scientist Sir John Herschel. Herschel was, in fact, a famous scientist, but he's apparently, in this article, discovered people living on the moon. And the articles discovered great seas and canyons, pillars of red rock and lunar trees unlike any other, save the largest kinds of yews in English churchyards, which they in some respects resemble. But the greatest discovery was large winged creatures, when not borne aloft, could pass for humans. I mean, the ultimate fake news, and it was a sensation.
Absolutely. If your business model is engagement, the more interesting, the more engagement. And, back in 1835, how are you going to know that this report about man bats on the moon wasn't true? Never retracted, I should add.
Never retracted.
Yes, still. I suppose the editors are still standing behind that story.
There are man bats. Well, in fact,
I should also add it was not a story; it was a 6-part series.
Yeah.
So in every episode, they got closer and closer to the man bats, who I also add to even make it more lurid, behave like reality TV contestants. They were strong sexual appetites and like wild creatures. So, they threw it all in there. No, pretty soon, as you can see, the competition, when the competition is who can get the most attention, well, the battle goes to the most outlandish, at least in the short term. Over the long term, I think it's not quite as true. Sometimes people get sick of just straight out tabloid stuff. But at least in the short term, you can win by being more outlandish, crazy, interesting. And, we saw the election. A lot of that happened. You see it in television with some regularity.
So it's I love this book because it's a history of in a way a history of my business of mass media and of ad supported mass media, the attention merchants, the epic scramble to get inside our heads. For the most part, it's just a history. It's interesting because I think in the Master Switch you really were talking about a trend that it was a history as well, but it seemed I guess more of a warning. Although this is clearly a warning about what's going on with the attention merchants.
Yeah, well, the Master Switch was covering the same thing. I'm writing books about 20th century. I think the 20th century was kind of a strange time.
Yes.
Like so interesting.
Yes.
These massive collision between technology and society for the first time, and very advanced technologies. And I think that it's. It covers the same period. The difference, I guess, is the Master Switch was about empire builders. The Master Switch was a book about what happens after the big inventions, the radio,
right,
the television, the telephone, and who emerges from the rubble, from the competitive period right after those to take hold of the Master Switch. This book is much different. It's a book about a business model that just grew from an obscure part of the world, tabloid news that we just talked about, and just grew and grew and grew and grew to become part of our daily life, and to, as we said earlier, have a role in informing, in some sense, what it means to be human in our time. So that's the difference between the books, stated simply.
We're going to take a break, and we'll talk more with Tim Wu in just a second. Our show today brought to you by Optical Cables from Corning. We try to get advertisers that have products you would be interested in. Crazy thought. If you have bad breath, these will not solve the problem. These will not get you married. These will not find the perfect mate. But you know what these will do is these will give you longer, thinner, lighter, better cables for your Thunderbolt and your USB 3.0 devices. And that's it's a small thing, but a big thing. If you're, let's say you're a company called Universal Audio and you make these amazing Thunderbolt audio interfaces, and you need to test them in anechoic chambers and so forth to achieve acoustic isolation in their studio so they can get those best-selling audio interfaces out to you. You can actually see this at the site if you go to opticalcablesbycorning.com. These cables are really an interesting invention. In fact, this is also documented at the site because you might say, well, of course everybody knows the value of fiber optics, but that's not what I've got coming out of my computer. I have, just a standard copper connector, USB or Thunderbolt. Well, that's what's cool about these little tiny devices at the end of these cables. They take the RF signal from the port, they turn it into light, send it down the glass fibers in the cables, and convert it back into an optical RF signal when it gets at the other end without any degradation. And because glass does such a good job, you can go 60 meters, 200 feet on Thunderbolt. 200 feet without degradation. 165 feet for USB 3. And you know what? You don't have to worry about these cables. It used to be we had to hang our fiber in the air so we wouldn't step on it. No, you could tie it in a knot. You can tie it in a bow. You can crimp it. This stuff is not your father's optical cables. If your dad had optical cables, this stuff is amazing. I say it takes a bending and it keeps on sending. Optical Cables by Corning, available at all major electronics and professional AV retailers. I use it. I have my Drobo. I have a big Drobo array, lots of storage. It's actually my personal drive on my iMac at home, but I don't want to have it sitting on the table. It's got 5 drives in there. So I use a USB 3.0 optical cable from Corning, and I put it down underneath the desk, way far away. No problem. It's quiet, cool, doesn't bother me. Optical Cables by Corning. You'll find them at all major electronics and professional AV retailers, Apple stores, Amazon, B&H, and more. Optical cables by Corning. Longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com if you want to learn more. And, of course, we thank Corning for their support, making triangulation possible. Tim Wu is my guest. I'm all tangled up. Here we go. Tim Wu is my guest. His new book, and by the way, Tim Wu is a legend in the biz, the creator of the term net neutrality. And actually, you can read his paper from 2006 talking about net neutrality and broadband competition. It's online and well worth reading. His latest is The Attention Merchants, the epic scramble to get inside our head. I'm so glad to have you. Where are you now, Tim? You've moved.
Yeah.
Closer to the power.
Slightly different angle.
That's fine. Yeah, you look great. Yeah. So you've worked in government.
Sure.
Tell me about that, because going from the groves of academe to government is sometimes a jarring move.
I have had this strange kind of career where I have trying to try it all. I worked in Silicon Valley for years, and also used to be a programmer. So that's sort of my tech side.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Very well. When I was young, I abandoned the field to more talented programmers. One thing you realize when you're in programming is like either you're the absolute best or might as well forget it.
Yeah.
And my brother was better than me. And I was like, I can't stand to do something where my brother's better than me. So brother's still a programmer. Nice. Anyway, so that's an aside. And then I worked in academia and then also worked government in various capacities, usually some version of consumer protection or tech policy kind of roles.
You clerked for Richard Posner too in the Seventh Circuit.
Yes, and for Justice Stephen Breyer in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that must have been interesting. Posner was very active in a number of big tech cases, as I remember. Yeah,
Microsoft among them.
Yeah, he was
the old Microsoft
the DOJ Microsoft. Case.
Yeah, that case was a big stage setter. I mean, some of the listeners and viewers may not have been old enough to realize it, but it kind of tamed Microsoft. Microsoft used to be like the most dangerous company in the world. I think they're a little. They're not a perfect company, but they're not this sort of predatory, aggressive monopolist that they once were. And
it's actually been good for Microsoft. One could argue.
I think in some ways it was. It might have even been better for Microsoft if they cut the company in two.
Yeah.
I think they wanted to do that during the Clinton administration. They wanted to break it into a operating system company coupled with applications, so Office and PowerPoint and everything would have been a separate company. If you imagine Microsoft as two, they might have actually been better off as two companies, but no company wants to divide itself in two, or very few do, because, well, then the empire is smaller, so that didn't happen. But, I think without that Microsoft case, I don't want to go on about it too long. I don't know if Google gets its start, for instance. If you're trying to get started on an Explorer, which was the dominant browser in 2001 by far, if you're trying to get started on that browser, and you have a company that is trying to kill you and has no oversight as to how they try and get you, I think a lot of the companies that are giants today, do not get to where they are at all without that. And then essentially Microsoft would have run the whole kingdom. Very different history. But sorry, that's a little bit of an aside.
Well, no, and in fact, then it begs the question, well, who's getting suppressed today by the utter dominance of Facebook and Google and Amazon? I guess we'd throw them in as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's hard to start a company today if you have anything to do with search, in the sense that you sort of know that either Google will copy it, and then you'll be in trouble, or that how are you going to get money? Because it's really about ad revenue.
By the way, that's exactly the sentence people said in the 90s about Microsoft. Well, you can't start a software company because Microsoft will either engulf and devour you or steal it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of thing matters. I think it's always important to examine the structural conditions of the industry and see whether it's still a good place to be an inventor. I mean, one reason I think America has been so successful and the West Coast is because we managed to keep things fresh sometimes that involves big breakups, breaking companies into small pieces to keep it fresh. In Europe and Japan, countries that once seemed to threaten the United States' technological dominance, they never really broke up their telecom companies. So, the AT&T equivalents remained incredibly powerful throughout the internet age. I think it's one of the reasons they never really developed a great tech sector. I mean, a great app sector. Like the Google. There's no real European competitor to Google or Facebook.
Right.
America kind of won that round, and I think partially it's because I think at least that the phone companies are just still so powerful in those countries.
You talk a lot about in the Master Switch and your other writings about the Carter phone decision and the Husha phone decision, which broke up AT&T. Although, ironically, it's kind of reformed, hasn't it?
Yeah, they. You remember that robot in Terminator that smashed to pieces would always break itself back together? That is AT&T, the company. It just comes back. It's kind of but maybe you have to blow it up every once in a while again. Right now,
disruption is important, isn't it?
It is.
It's part of the creative cycle, is destruction and then creation.
That's a funny thing because a lot of technologists will be all about that. We believe in disruption. We want things to change
until we're in charge.
That's right. We're like, no, we want to put them out of business.
We'll disrupt right up to the point where we make it, and then hey, I like how things are now. Let's just leave that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that.
That's
Can I talk about something else while we're on it?
I was
listening to your ad. Yeah. Sure. No, I was listening to your ad, and I thought it was a good ad. Actually, I enjoyed it. I was.
Thank you.
It was thoughtful, useful. The whole quest, especially online, the whole challenge, I think, in our times is trying to find out some kind of equilibrium between advertising and content. And I think you did a nice job here. We have an interesting podcast, and then you learn about Corning product, and you go back. It's not.
I've thought a lot about this, Tim, because as I mentioned initially, I didn't want to do advertising, and so I thought, well, how can I do this with integrity? And of course, number one job is not to mix editorial with advertising, and that's something that's completely disappearing with native content. And I grew up in an era where you did that, and I worked for Ziff Davis, and there was a very strong firewall between ads and editorial. I remember when Microsoft didn't like a review of probably Windows 3.0 in PC Magazine. They said, we're going to pull our ads, and to their credit, Ziff Davis said fine. And Microsoft came back because, well, where else were you going to be?
Right.
So that's one. And then I think the other one is to not only to clearly identify an ad, but and I'm very influenced. You talk a lot in the book about the early ad companies, Edward Bernays, and somebody I hadn't really known about who was even more important than Bernays. And his name is escaping me for the moment. Cloud Hopkins.
Yes.
Who were really the people who created this idea of creating a need. Imagined a reel like halitosis for a product. Hopkins invented toothpaste, in effect. Nobody used toothpaste until he started talking about how that film on your teeth and Pepsodent would grit it away, and everybody had to use toothpaste all of a sudden by creating a need. And so we try not to do that. I've talked, and I was actually about to mention this. I do an Ignite, a 15-minute Ignite speech where I talk about Bernays and created needs, and say that in my opinion, the future of new media is to abjure that kind of trickery and go back to the old Sears Roebuck catalog day of informational advertising, where here's the product, here's what it does. Try to pick products that our audience would be interested in, rather than tracking our audience to algorithmically give them ads they'd be interested in.
Right.
And now we're small, and I consider this almost artisanal media. It's kind of handmade. Obviously, this doesn't scale to Facebook or NBC, but for us, it works, I think, quite well, and our audience, I think, understands that this is the tit for tat.
I think there's a lot of thought that needs to be done in the online and tech world about reaching basically a new deal or a better understanding of what the deal is. I mean, what we have on the web right now is not working for anyone, because consumers go to sites and suddenly 1,000 little things pop up. They spend all their time trying to swat it like flies, and they resent the companies for trying to get them. The whole thing is terrible for consumers. But then, the advertisers feel kind of desperate. They want to reach people. They got to do something. And of course, the publishers feel like, oh my goodness, we're just making less and less money. And of course, Google and Facebook have almost all the ad revenue anyways. And, give us a break. So we have this terrible kind of setup. And, I one of the aspirations of this book is like, can we do better? Can we get past this? As you point out, advertising at some level is information. And information can be valuable. And, presented well, it can be useful to you. And there are situations where people actually enjoy or like the advertising. It's not easy it only happens. In TV, I think it only happens during the Super Bowl. But, take fashion magazines, kind of a random example. But
Vogue is thick as can
magazine.
be still because its audience wants those ads.
They want those ads. And so, there is this possibility of kind of creating a win-win. But right now we're in the situation, and we're in a revolt against advertising.
Yeah, you talk about this in the book, is that you push it too far inevitably, and there's example after example. There'll be a revolt against it.
There will be a revolt, and I think we're in the midst of a kind of a revolt right now. But it's lead people to even more desperate measures to try and reach consumers. So I don't know how you do it. Maybe your approach, I mean, big things of small beginning, but sort of more artisanal, tailored, something different than the hard edge, like we're going to get you and then brand this into your brain. Somehow, we're going to force you to know that Bud Light exists. I mean, I know Bud Light exists. I don't need to hear about it again. Something different. I don't know what it's going to be. It's challenging. But, everyone knows that sometimes there is information they want to know about. There's some advertising. I think some of the most valuable stuff is for new content. I mean, you don't know if film exists until it comes out. People like Star Wars trailers. They don't turn them off. They're excited. They actually go to YouTube to watch them. So somewhere in here, there is like a win-win situation. The problem there's a lot of desperation and desperate businesses that are kind of ruining it for everyone. And I don't see the answer in the short term, but I think we can work something out. The geeks of the world and everyone, frankly, the audiences and consumers, like that, we all sort of want the same stuff. We want to get good content. We don't mind learning about new products. We're willing to pay for some content too. I mean, I know it's hard to get people to pay for content. I really believe that if you like something, you want to support it, either you should listen to an advertisement or you should start paying for it. And, try to put your money where your mouth is and support the stuff you believe in. Because expecting everything's going to be free forever is a little juvenile. I used to be like that when I was younger. Somehow I thought the web could just kind of go by itself, and it's just not true. There needs to be support for things. So sorry for that little rant, but I think it's very important to the future of the web, which is, I think, something a lot of us care about who help watch it grow.
Of late I've been thinking about my naive, innocent days when I thought the web was going to be this great democratizing force and that everybody would have a voice and a million voices would ultimately point us towards truth and justice, and everything would get better. And and what's struck me of late is that everybody gets a voice, but unfortunately, some voices, probably because of this attention thing you're talking about, this lizard mind, get more attention than others, and it's often the most negative voices. And so it isn't the utopia that I thought it would be. There's some very good things. If you look at YouTube, anybody can become a filmmaker and distribute it. There's no, you don't have to scrabble. I worked in traditional media for years and years and years, but here I am with my own business doing podcasts because of this. So there's some, it can be done, it can be good, but so much of what we see isn't. Are you a little disappointed by? I don't know. Were you? It sounds like you were a little utopian like me in the early days. Has the internet become a dystopia?
I'm fascinated in utopia and dystopia. I think a lot of us, you, me, many people who were essentially believers in a more democratic media, the voice of the people, this different kind of environment, not dominated by a couple big speakers just blowing reality television at us. I think it has been challenging. I wouldn't. It's hard to paint a broad brush because some things are still amazing. It's sort of astonishing. You have Wikipedia, this encyclopedia, built by volunteers, and there it is, and
it's amazing.
They have, I think what we didn't think, democracy has never worked well in politics or in media. This is our first experiments with media democracy. So political democracy, they learned pretty quickly that if you just have votes on everything, it turns into mob rule pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the lesson of ancient Greece. They're like, well, who wants to put these black people to death? Yeah, we do. That was that pretty quickly. Or who thinks this guy did the crime? I do. He looks weird. Okay, let's kill him. So popular democracy pretty quickly was abandoned, even in the ancient world. And everyone's like, no one wants that. That's just insanity. Mob rule. What you need is a kind of channeled representative democracy or a deliberative democracy. Certain things need to be left to judges, not just the crowd. You need experts to do things that are hard, not just big groups. So, we've learned that in politics somewhat. We haven't learned it perfectly, but we've learned some lessons. We don't have trials just with angry crowds putting people to death, although who knows during the next administration. I don't know.
That's the thing. But, maybe we have learned that, but I think we've also seen a move towards true democracy lately. People feel like the elites are running the game, and we want our voice.
We have seen a move towards popular democracy, and I think it's as I say,
all over the world.
Maybe I'm going to sound aristocratic, but it's it's a little bit dangerous, and it's an old danger that everyone's always realized. The fascist regimes in the 30s were elected through popular movements. They're populist movements, and there's always been some danger of just absolute pure mob rule. But I think we're trying, or maybe we need to learn the same lessons in the media. Is like, once again, democracy is a tremendous thing, but it needs to be channeled. Maybe Wikipedia is an example of doing that successfully. They're nonprofit. They have a lot of rules. They're careful about it. It is a mass product, but it's not like a free-for-all. And, doing that carefully is really not easy. This is what the wisdom of the founders were not, pure Democrats.
No, we have a representative democracy.
Yeah. If you look at what Hamilton or Madison were talking about, they were warning against the tyranny of majority rule.
Right.
And they set things up to, checks and balances, federalism, a million different systems to channel and control popular rule. And so we kind of need that for the media, and I think maybe we're getting towards it. But
that's interesting. There's no pluralism when Facebook dominates.
No, that's right. And I think maybe we can learn something from this period. Facebook's a great example because they're like, we're not a media company. So they kind of disclaim even that they have any responsibility. It's as if, a government was running the government. They're like, well, we're not actually a government. We're just a bunch of janitors. So, if there's a war that breaks out, don't blame us.
But we debate this a lot because, on the other hand, do you want Facebook to be censoring or in some way channeling the content? Clearly it's a media company.
They already are. They already are.
Algorithmically.
So,
yeah.
Well, they already are, but not only that. Do you see porn on Facebook?
No, you're right. Yeah.
There are. Oh, yeah, but that's porn. That's different. They already are censoring.
So they are a media company. They can deny it all they want.
They are a media company, and they are constantly involved in content control. And so I think either you do that. You might say, oh, I hate Facebook and I don't want to do them, but they're already doing it. So.
And we know the majority of Americans get at least some of their news from Facebook.
Yeah. I'm shocked, actually. I don't go to Facebook that often. When I go to it, it's always a shocking experience of just how much of it is that, famous filter bubble where you hear people complaining about the things that you complain about as well. And, it kind of feels bad to read too much there from, I don't know. That's another lesson in my book is like trying to control your own diet has become so important today because you have to be very programmatic about like what you decide to eat or else you, when I say eat, I mean
consume,
watch or listen to. Yeah. You really have to choose very, very carefully. It's always been true, but it's even more true now. The more freedom you have, the more responsibility.
There's so many topics in this book, and there's no way I'm going to go through all of them. I just want everybody to read it. The attention merchants, because it's really engaging. You talk about micro celebrity, which is a fascinating subject by itself.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about YouTube, and I know when I talk about it, I sound like an old-time broadcast guy going, what is these kids doing on this YouTube thing? But I also feel like I'm not sure YouTube is where I want media to end up. It's kind of democracy. It's this democracy in media. And it's not
the same lesson. I just keep going back.
Yeah.
Same lesson is like we are learning that mass rule is not, mob rule, total populism, full democracy is not what we want in the media environment. I mean, you only have to go to the comments section of anything to realize that. That it brings out, people can be better or worse versions of themselves depending on the environment. Like the same person can be a thoughtful student in class, and then the same person can be at like a riot and smash a car to pieces. It kind of depends on the structures that we live in. And I think we've created a lot of online environments a little bit that are kind of like, online riots, and most of the
well, that's what Twitter is, clearly. Twitter is a mob. It's just an outraged mob going from subject to subject.
Twitter can get pretty wild, actually. Yeah,
I used to think that there's some percentage, just a small percentage of people are bad and everybody else is good. And now I've realized, no, we're all about that percentage bad, all of us. And so that's why it is important to kind of cultivate our media diet. I think that's good. What is your advice for doing that? Turning off Facebook?
My advice is experimentation. Like just trying stuff and sort of feeling, well, how is it? So like go without Facebook for a month. How does that feel? Do I feel like I miss it? Do I feel like, oh, that's better? Try, some people don't use their computers on weekends or certain days. Try that, see how it feels. Try things like try watching TV. Pick a series and watch it. See if you like having a program, or try watching no TV.
But what if you can't trust your lizard mind to tell you what's good for you? That's like saying, well, try some Hostess cupcakes, see how you feel.
Well, people try this in their own. I mean, this presupposes a little bit of self-control.
Okay.
But I also think you have to have pretty hard lines. Like you have to tell yourself, all right, I'm going to have a rule, right? Like my rule is, maybe if you have kids, like I don't. People with children actually have a lot of rules like this. Like I don't do anything but just hang out with them from say 6 till when they go to bed or something. Right. So that's kind of like a human contact rule. So I believe this is a kind of a geek solution. Experimentation, figuring out
what's our metric.
Trying out rules.
What are we looking for?
Attention cycles. You need to think of yourself as owning attentional cycles. You've probably got, let's say, 100 a minute.
Okay.
Of things you can pay attention to. Okay. And then you have 168 hours a week, and you decide how you're going to spend it. So you sit there with your budget and be like, that's how I'm going to spend it.
Oh, that's a good metaphor. We have an attention budget.
Yeah, you have an attention budget. And you're like, all right, how am I spending it? And it's like, then you look back like, yeah.
I think it's kind of up to you to figure out what your goals are, though.
That's right. So you can sit down and be like, well, my goals are, I need to learn some stuff. I need to be entertained, and I need to be calm. So you could spend and I need to take care of my children, let's say, or have friends. I mean, some people, I think they lose track of the fact that it's, you keep, friendships by actually meeting people in person. That tends to help. I mean, Facebook likes are one thing, but actually meeting people is something else. So if your goals are having friends, or maybe your goal is learn to play the piano, is just figuring out how that's going to get into the attentional budget to happen. Basically, the attentional budget is who you become, right? If you look back at how you spent that week, that time and attentional cycle, it sort of charts the course for what direction you're moving as a person. And I think if you pay attention to this for a while, you'll see, if you pay attention to your own attention, you will see that you're being shaped by how you're moving that cursor around.
So the real issue is to have some intention on your attention.
Yes.
Not to just let the winds of punching monkeys and belly fat just take you hither and thither.
I mean, frankly, it's a matter of character and self-development. It's sort of John Stuart Mill kind of stuff. It's like, well, who do I want to be? You know, do you want to be a better person, a thought, a character? Like, well, how do you want to develop yourself to what you can become, who you're going to be? Well, the key to that is how do you spend your attention? I think that is the beginning and end of it. That's where you start. It's not about like, it doesn't just happen. It's like, where is that time spent? You know, Malcolm Gladwell had this book that said if you want to get good at anything, you have to do it for 10,000 hours. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, that's a lot of not writing random emails
or watching YouTube. Yeah,
or watching YouTube.
Although you can get good watching it on YouTube, but watch those videos and don't get distracted.
If that's what you want your life to be,
right?
Which is not a bad. Well, I wouldn't personally recommend that goal, but you know, well, maybe you want to be a well-read person, so you spend all your time reading. Right. Okay, well, that's your goal. But you know, whatever it is, that's what it's gonna take you. And that writing this book's made that very clear to me. And very clear, you live in an environment that's trying to pull you away from what you want to do, and that's what I want to emphasize. Is it's a very difficult. It's like we're trying to write poetry in the casino or something. You know, our environment is like a casino. You know how casinos are designed to try and pull you into things and get you caught up in them for hours at a time and not really realize what just happened.
Yep.
That is what our environments are like. So, you know, I don't hate to make people paranoid, but I think it's just true.
No, it's almost like saying, wake up. And it's one of my fun games to play when I go to Las Vegas is what tricks are they playing on us this time?
Interesting.
And it is very interesting. Boy, there's so much more we could talk about. The gamification of apps. We've talked before about dark patterns. There's a wonderful site, darkpatterns.org, about how people try to trick you psychologically into doing what they want to. This is a great place to start if you want to reclaim your attention. I think your next book, Tim, has to be a self-help book on how to do it, right? But opening your eyes is the first step.
I agree with that. Yeah. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate your being here. The book is The Attention Merchants, The Epic Scramble to Get Inside Our Heads. Tim Wu, the author. There is an Audible version of this, highly recommended, or buy the book. But I guarantee you'll start this book. This is a page turner. When you don't normally think of that, think of books like this as being a page turner. This is a page turner. At least it is. Maybe it's just because I'm in the business and I'm fascinated.
No, I tried to make it one, and I knew that. You know, I knew I'm dealing in an environment where books are fighting some pretty tough competitors, right? So if you're going to write a book, the author today has a duty to go to their audience. It's just the fact. And I love page-turning books myself, so I'm glad to hear you say that. I've tried to make it like that.
Oh, it's hell. And, you know, we didn't even get to the, Goebbels and the Nazis and how they used radio. We didn't talk about the amazing poster crisis of Paris in the 1800s. There's so much in this book, and you got to read it, and it's fascinating. And I hope I can get you to come back here and spend more time with us. I know there's a Google Talk you did if people want to see more Tim Wu. And just briefly, you coined the term net neutrality. What are you thinking now? It looks like maybe net neutrality is history.
Well, it's under threat. It is law. It'll be challenging. And also, I think, net neutrality is pretty popular. It's not popular among Washington lobbyists, but among the average person, if you ask the average person, how do you feel about, your cable company deciding what internet sites you get? They're like, you got to be kidding me. Doesn't sound appealing at all. Right. So there's no popularity. The anti-net neutrality movement is only popular among telecom executives and the people they pay to pretend to like them. There's no real popularity, and so I think when they get into trying to pull it down, dismantle net neutrality, it's not exactly going to be met by the public with a lot of excitement, and so. I just say it's going to be a little harder said than done, or done than said.
Although there is one thing that's very popular, which is zero rating, and it's hard to explain to people why that's not good for them.
Yeah, it's true. It's a very clever version of attack on net neutrality.
They're clever,
I agree.
These attention merchants. Tim Wu, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Great pleasure.
Take care.
See you next time.
Our book, a must-read this week. You got to get it. The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu. And as I said, it's everywhere, including Audible. Audible's a good way to use your attention wisely. You've got some attention in the car as you're driving to work. That's a good way to do it. Our show is every Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 1900 UTC. If you want to join us live, I'd love it. Chat room is there, irc.twit.tv. If you can't, though, don't worry. There's on-demand versions of everything we do on our website, twit.tv, in this case, twit.tv/TRI. Also on youtube.com/triangulation. Or go to youtube.com/twit. All of our shows are there. And you can subscribe in your favorite podcast application. Subscribe is a good idea. You don't want to miss an episode. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time on Triangulation.